Hello, Tamara here. Welcome to the show. Today's guest is Sherry Gaba. She's a licensed psychotherapist and life coach who helps people cope with codependency, love addiction, toxic relationships, and mental health issues. Thanks for joining me, Sherry.
Hi, Tamara. Thank you for having me. Love what you're doing in the world.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, you have an impressive resume yourself, and I'm happy to get right into it with the first question, and then we can talk maybe a little bit about some of your resume if you want to as well. But I will start with what does trauma have to do with picking toxic relationships?
If you have early trauma and you don't get that nurturing that you need from your parents, you're going to probably develop an insecure ambivalent or disorganized attachment style. And we develop this from our attachment styles with our parents. If parents exhibit being nurturing and caring and attentive, then you're probably going to have a more secure attachment, which would make you less prone to picking someone toxic. If you had parents that are cold or rejecting or emotionally detached, these children don't know what to expect. So they're not going to pick the best partners. They're going to kind of, duplicate what they know. We usually pick what we know. So then they become adults who desire a lot of connection with their relationships, but then all of a sudden they become very clingy and desperate. They're highly aware of these changes in the relationship. It can really increase their anxiety when they have this kind of attachment disorder. And it starts with your early attachment with your caregivers. So this person's usually going to focus their energy on increasing connection with their partner. They're going to need more validation and approval. It's basically an attempt to recover the loss of their childhood. When a child receives lots of love and nurturing, they feel secure. But if they grow up without that, they're going to feel insecure. They're going to have those other attachment styles. So that person's likely going to, if they have good parenting, they're going to grow up with a good sense of themselves. They're going to feel complete. They're going to be able to help, create healthy boundaries. But without that nurturing, they just have very poor self-esteem. They're insecure. And that's going to lead them to maybe becoming a relationship addict, a love addict, because they had parents that were physically or emotionally unavailable. They might have been neglected or abused. They might have had a parent that was divorced, so they became a parentified child, where they had to kind of take care of all their parents' needs. Some come from intact, functional families, and then they end up becoming love addicts, maybe when they become a peer because they want to fit in, they get bullied. But generally, it's this kind of childhood where they didn't get their needs met. So we know that the greater the intensity of those unmet needs, the stronger their love addiction is going to be. And they're trying to relieve that childhood. They're trying to make their childhood right. And obviously another person can't make it right. So being in that relationship, they think is going to relieve those negative feelings they had as children. But it doesn't. It ends up being very obsessive, very possessive. They end up picking very controlling, manipulating people, often narcissists. They're going to be like a toxic relationship. So it's, in a nutshell, it's an unconscious attempt to satisfy that developmental hunger that they didn't get.
Yeah, and I was going to say, if they have a secure partner, can they heal that childhood stuff through a secure partner? I know it might be harder for them to actually sustain a relationship with a secure partner, but is that something that can happen, or is it more self-soothing and you have to do the work yourself?
Well, you have to do the work. No one's going to, make it all okay. You have to be able to regulate your own nervous system. You have to be comfortable in your own skin. However, if you're picking secure, you're on the right track. At least you're not picking someone toxic. You're not picking someone insecure. Some have the theory that a good relationship, you can end up being reparented in some way. But I think that's a lot of responsibility for another partner. If you're very needy, very clingy, you really need to find your own therapist, work on your own pain. You need to fix your own fear, fix your discomfort. Definitely hire a trauma therapist. There's a lot of talk therapists out there. You really need someone that will go even deeper with the neglect that you experienced, the abandonment, the chaos that you grew up in. And then, yes, if you have somebody secure and you're in therapy and you're working towards becoming a more secure person, I think you absolutely can be with someone secure. But if you're someone still desperate, still craving, still clingy, still needy, you're probably going to push a secure person away.
Yeah. And is jealousy part of that too? Like, is that part of what you're talking about, or is that a different thing?
You're inside, you're probably going to feel jealous. If you were abandoned by a parent, you're going to probably feel jealous. If you had a parent that cheated, you're probably going to feel jealous. If you have a history of being cheated on, you're probably going to have these issues. So, the whole adage is to come into a relationship in a really whole way so you can meet another whole person. We don't always start out that way. Sometimes people grow together. Sometimes one grows, sometimes the other doesn't. But you have a much better chance of attracting a healthy person if you've done the work. But the problem is for love addicts, they don't want to do the work. There's so much discomfort and agony being alone. I mean, that was my story. I write about it in my book, Love Smacked, which is on Amazon and Audible. Amazon Kindle and Audible. I talk a lot about my multiple relationships, going from one relationship to the next. It's like death it was like death being alone. And so what did that set me up for? Alcoholics, toxic relationships, being abandoned. I was looking for them to fill what I needed to fill within myself. And that never turns out well. So that's the problem with not fixing your issues, is you're going to be more prone to predator, toxic people, narcissists, etc.
Yeah. And you can go either way. I was going to say, do you want to say more about how you healed that, or talk about, I know you mentioned love addiction. Do you want to say more about that, or do you think that's
I can
covered?
talk about both, really. I found a really great trauma therapist. I was a therapist at the time, but I didn't know anything about trauma work. So I found this amazing therapist who did somatic work. And that's what I'm certified in somatic work, polyvagal, which is, getting your nervous system regulated. I do stuff with parts work, kind of befriending your different parts. But the somatic work itself really allowed me to be comfortable in my own skin. I was able to discharge a lot of the energy around my early trauma, which was my story. Sometimes people find it interesting. I was in an incubator. My mother didn't hold me for 2.5 months. I'm 66, so in those days, they were afraid the mother would pass on the germs. And so I didn't get that early attachment. I was almost like one of these, Romanian,
Orphans.
Orphan children. Exactly.
Yeah.
So I came into the world just very hungry, very desperate, needing attention. In those days, they didn't do the things they do today for preemies. Now they give preemies, lots of extra attention. They know that attachment is vital. And then, my mother was somewhat of, I wouldn't call her, she was a bit of a narcissist. She had some traits. She was an alcoholic. She wasn't always present, so that didn't help. My father was amazing. I really had a great relationship with my dad. I think that was fantastic, but it still had that mother wound, which combined that with being premature really set me up for a lot of really difficult relationships, a lot of separation anxiety, a lot of attachment issues, and just picking for all the wrong reasons. But I don't want people, if they've had similar experiences, there's nothing to beat yourself up about. You didn't know that. You don't know why you're doing these things. It's unconscious. There's always help, though. There's programs. There's my book. My book is a great start. There's meetings out there on love addiction. There are all kinds of things out there to help you heal that wound.
Yeah, and I know they have Codependent No More is the book, I believe, and then they also have programs for that. Is that similar to like love addiction, or is it someone would have that if they have love addiction?
So you can be a codependent and not be a love addict, but I think most love addicts are codependent because you're looking for someone else to validate you, fill you up. You don't feel needed unless you're in a relationship. But you can be a codependent. You can be like the parent that's always volunteering because you want to please. You could be the person at the church or the temple that's always volunteering. You're never saying no. You don't have boundaries. So it's separate, but kind of overlaps. I definitely have both. I think codependency is a lot about people pleasing. I know Mel Robbins wrote a book called Let Them. That's a huge thing right now, about just let them, like not worrying about what other people think, being your authentic self. But takes time, and if you didn't get what you needed early on, you are going to look for others to please. You're going to get into relationships where you turn yourself into a pretzel to please. You don't have that sense of that core self. And so when you ask me, how did therapy help me? Doing the trauma therapy really helped me develop this core self. And so I didn't need to run after anything to feel good inside. Really the opposite of addiction, whether it's food or sex or love or alcoholism or substances or gambling or shopping, is really connection. And so the trauma work and working with a great trauma therapist helps you learn how to connect with yourself. You learn how to self-soothe. You learn how to self-regulate. You don't need, like I was the type that if something didn't work out, I was like on the phone with my friends, on the phone with my mother, like whoever would listen to me. Like I couldn't regulate my own emotions. And today that's not the case. And so I can be patient. I can be single and be happy. I hope someday I find somebody, but it's not my only sense of self.
How would you say if you are in a toxic relationship?
You're in a toxic relationship if you're constantly ruminating and obsessing about that person. When you give up everything just to be with that person, like I was saying earlier, you kind of turn yourself into a pretzel just to be with that person. You twist your personality, you twist your values. I was dating someone that was one political party, I'm the other. And unfortunately, this person was constantly trying to get me to be on their side of their political party. And so in order to sometimes avoid fighting, I kind of like went, okay. And then I realized, no, I'm losing myself trying to please this person. It's not healthy for someone trying to change you. That's never a good sign. And being controlling about it. Another would be walking on eggshells and then feeling guilty for everything because they're probably trying to control you. So then you start to feel guilty. Oh, am I doing something wrong? What am I doing wrong? So you kind of second guess yourself. There's a lot of fighting, could be physical, could be verbal, it could be emotional. A lot of manipulation, controlling behaviors. A toxic person will feel they have the right to tell you how to spend your time, how to dress, how to do your hair. Another example would be, I love to travel. I have a girlfriend that I travel with. I was in a relationship with someone who didn't want me to travel with this person. Like, no, you can't travel with her. You have to be with me. And it's like, no. I want to travel. And if you can't afford to travel, you're not available to travel, I'm going to travel. So you're trying, and so for a minute, I almost like agreed with that. And I realized, no, that's not who I want to be in the world. So it's somebody that's constantly at you, trying to change you, trying to make you what they want you to be. A lot of yelling, insulting, can be physical, a lot of disrespect, dishonesty, lying, and most important, just losing yourself. You stop taking care of yourself. There's a lack of self-care. Start neglecting your appearance, the activities, your hobbies. You just let go of who you are to be with this person.
Hi, everyone. Sorry for the interruption. I just wanted to point out that there is a send us a text message at the very beginning of the description, and you can use that to send in an anonymous question or comment. So I'd really appreciate it. All right. Thanks. Yeah, I can see that. And then there are people apparently that are become addicted to these kinds of relationships. What's the benefit of that, or why do they do that?
Well, why do people get addicted? Because they don't want to be alone. And there's also what's known as a trauma bond. So someone who has love bombed you, and love addicts are very, very vulnerable to being love bombed because they want to be with someone so badly. So when someone gives them a lot of attention and they're, I want to marry you, or, they're sending you flowers all the time, like way over the top, someone who's very vulnerable and very empty is going to be like, oh, this feels so good. This feels so good. Then they kind of suck you in if they're a narcissist or toxic person, and then everything changes. Now they have you, and now all the abuse starts, all the emotional, verbal, possibly physical. So you have to be very aware of these love bombs. If someone's way over the top in their beginning of dating, probably it's not healthy. It should be slow and steady, call you, here and there, ask you out. Just a very calm sort of flow. But if someone is just like, be aware, then you're kind of getting attached to that love bombing behavior, and then they change, and you keep looking for that old behavior that they gave you in the beginning, and now you're in a trauma bond. And once you're in a trauma bond, it's much harder to get out.
Yeah, actually, I know someone who, he seemed like Prince Charming until they got married, and then he started like physically abusing her, and then he ended up shooting his next relationship. Like she lived, but she got, he shot her, and is in jail now at least. So yeah, it's definitely. And he was like total Prince Charming until the wedding day.
What I do, that's my specialty, working with people to help them break free, or if they have broken free, but they can't seem to let go of that addiction to it, to that ruminating. It's really hard. It's not easy. And the other part of a trauma bond is being addicted to the highs and lows. And then when that's gone and that person is gone, it's like, oh, now who am I? What now what? Like you actually have changed your nervous system. So we do a lot of work on regulating your system and helping calm you down and helping you feel grounded and centered. I mean, it's work, but it's definitely possible.
Yeah, that's awesome that it's possible. Yeah,
always
to overcome that.
There's always hope. There's always hope. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I know.
Yeah.
Good.
No, I was just going to say I have all kinds of blogs on my website at sherrygaba.com. I have my book on Amazon and Audible, Love Smacked. I have a couple of courses there on narcissism and love addiction. I mean, there's all kinds of things out there, but they can start with looking at my blogs, and I think they'll get a lot of information. And I have an Instagram account at Codependency Curious, and I'm always posting things there. So there's a lot out there for this type of thing.
Okay. And we are on the same page because I was going to actually ask you about your resume, because I know you've been on TV as well, talking about this kind of stuff, and you're a leading expert on addiction and recovery. So if you want to talk about any of that as well.
Yeah, I started my career doing a lot of that back when Celebrity Rehab was on TV. That was one cable show with Dr. Drew, and that morphed into a couple of books related to addiction. And then I started realizing I kind of moved away from that and into more codependency and love addiction, because I felt like, I'm not the addict, I'm not the alcoholic, I was married to one. I don't really want to talk about this. I want to help people with what I know and what I've struggled with. So that's how it sort of changed. I still work with people that are struggling with addiction, but really my specialty now is trauma, codependency, and toxic relationships, and healing from those things. I also have a free ebook for anybody if they want to go to sherrygaba.com/NP quiz, sherrygaba.com/NP quiz. It's a free book, a book on narcissistic partners.
Okay. And you also talk about transgenerational trauma. Do you want to talk about that too?
Sure. So basically, our trauma doesn't just start with us. It starts with our parents. It starts with our grandparents. And I think about, my own grandmother was married 4 times. My mother ended up with a con man after my dad died. I've had multiple relationships that didn't work out. So I think there's a history in my family of love addiction and codependency. And it starts with our grandparents. And, if you think about the way our ancestors were as women, let's just start with women. There was a lot of, we didn't have a voice, and everything we did was to please the man, and we couldn't own property, and we couldn't vote. And so if you think about how that gets carried down, no wonder a lot of women lose themselves in relationships, because we didn't have much, when you look at our ancestors. So some of the work involved with transgenerational trauma is really looking at our ancestors, looking at our histories, maybe doing a little work around, not necessarily psychic work, right? We don't talk to them per se, but we kind of think of how did that affect me? And what might that person say if they were still here? What would be like, or using, like I had a grandmother that was amazing. So when I'm having a hard time, I think to myself, what would my grandmother do? Or how could I imagine my grandmother here as this protective ally that is here to love me, even though at the moment I'm not feeling really good? I know she's here. Her energy is here. So it's a little woo-woo, but it's really based on, who we are. It started a long time ago. And sometimes it helps fit the missing piece. Like, why am I like this? Why am I stuck? Think about what's happening in the world with the wars and what's happening with the anti-Semitism, or what's happening to the Palestinian people, or this stuff carries generation after generation of trauma. And there's a lot of anger out there, and there's a lot of violence out there. There's like, where did this start? Where did it start in your original family of origin, or did it start way before that? Think about slaves. Think about, there's just so many things that we can't explain that are in our genes, that have nothing to do with maybe our lived experience, but it had to do with our ancestors.
Yeah, I read a book where they talked about they had mice and they gave them like the scent of cherry, and then they would shock them, and then like the grandkid would just smell cherry, and then they would be nervous about it. It's like in the genes itself. So yeah, it's definitely
exactly like it's called epigenetics, and it lives in our DNA. And I mean, when October 7th happened, I have relatives that died during the Holocaust that lived in ghettos. I mean, that's my experience. Other people have different experiences, and I have compassion for all experiences of whatever trauma someone has comes from. That really shook me up, because this was really scary what happened that day to the people there. And then there's so many, I don't want to get into a political conversation, but there's so much involved, and there's so much trauma on all sides. Mm-hmm. Really.
Yeah. And then there's people that say that we're all like 5-year-olds, basically, like, deep down we're 5-year-olds fighting, and it's just never having temper tantrums kind of thing. So
yeah, we haven't, discharged the energy of something that might have happened to us at a younger age. If we're kind of stuck there developmentally, it's going to affect us. They say, like with addicts and alcoholics, they're developmentally the age they were when they started drinking. I think that for me, I'm developed in some ways without doing the work. I was developmentally the age I was when I came into the world, and I had no attachment figure. I mean, we have to work this energetically out, and that's where somatic work comes in, and nervous system regulation work, parts work, loving all those parts. In my case, loving that little wounded baby in the incubator, loving the resilient me, loving all those parts and accepting all those parts. It's fascinating stuff.
Yeah, definitely. Is there anything I missed that you wanted to share, or kind of like final comments, or?
No, this was great. If anybody is struggling right now and they are looking for a therapist, I do 15-minute consults for free. If they want to just check out my book, go to Amazon or Audible for Love Smacked, and go to sherrygaba.com, and there's lots of free resources there.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for being on. Great information. And hopefully, like you said, this helps someone, or at least even if they don't even know what cycle they're in, or what they're trapped in, they can recognize themselves maybe. So if you loved this episode, be sure to tell your friends about it and rate it as well. And also follow the show, of course. Thank you again, Sherry.
Thank you.
All right. Bye, everyone. Thanks.
Frank Talk. Sex and dating educates.